There's no job that's ever been more important than teaching, especially in the toughest of times, a global pandemic, emergency legislation, national lockdowns. But despite the many challenges, we've seen the incredible commitment and dedication of teachers who've worked tirelessly throughout the last year. When schools were closed, teachers kept going, designing, delivering, innovating, continuing to provide education for children and young people. There wasn't a blueprint, no instruction manual, no training, but teachers applied their professionalism and creativity to plug the gaps, continuing as teachers always do, to inspire young minds, creating opportunities where pupils can progress and achieve. And of course, keeping children safe by putting in place vital safety measures with the help of NASUWT health and safety representatives, making the world of difference to keep schools and colleges open safely. So today and every day, we say, let's thank all our teachers. And let's make sure we also look after our teachers by making sure they're valued and better rewarded too. So from the NASUWT, your union, the Teachers Union, we say a very big thank you.
Hello and welcome to the Thank You Day special. We are running this on behalf of NASUWT, of which I'm a very proud member. Sorry if there's any slight technical issues. I think things are starting to calm down now, but all of these videos will be available later on through our social media channels, so please do look out for those individual videos as well. That was Dr. Patrick Roach, the General Secretary of NASUWT, introducing the event here. And we have some guests as well. Now, we have focused on teachers because it is an NASUWT event. However, we will not exclusively be talking about teachers. We will be talking about all sorts of key workers from different backgrounds, and we have some representation on the panel that will hopefully give us some insight into the way different people have been during this pandemic. So it is Thank You Day today. We've been building up this for a while. I'm Paul Daly. I'm a national proposer of Thank You Day, which means that I was one of the people who suggested that this should happen. So I'm very proud to do that. So I'm also going to introduce the panel to you. So we've got Rachel Lazinski. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm good. I am a teacher, and typically just before the pandemic hit, at the Christmas term, I actually stepped away from a full-time role just to take a break due to some family circumstances, and thought I'll just have a nice break and I'll do some supply teaching for a while. And then the pandemic hit just a couple of months later and obviously turned everything on its head. So I'm here just to represent supply teaching and to talk a little bit about my experiences through the pandemic.
And I'm sure that's one of the things that people really haven't necessarily thought about. A lot of people haven't considered the impact on people like supply teachers. So that's going to be really interesting. And we've also got Angela Hankin. Hi, Angela.
Hiya. How are you doing?
I'm absolutely fine, thanks. And how are you? And also, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Paul. Well, I'm absolutely fine, actually. I'm doing really well. Sun's shining. It's great. England won, even better. I'm an NHS nurse, frontline worker, and you've asked me to come along today just to talk about what happened in the pandemic. I think it's quite recognised what happened in the healthcare profession with the pandemic, to be fair, but we're kind of coming out the other side a little bit and hoping we're not going to end up in another wave. We're getting on with our job, which is what we're there for. And hopefully everything's looking a lot better. Hopefully.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope there's no further deadly waves, because that would be a massive negative. I am sure everyone would agree. Yeah.
It is a worry. It's a worry, but like we planned all the way through this, we're planning again. So hopefully everything will be fine.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of hope in there, so we need a bit of hope, don't we? We need a
Yes.
bit of hope in these times. So what we're going to do throughout the show is play some little clips which will be available later on, as people as you know, as we release them throughout the day. So we're going to start off with a couple of clips. This one is from Rehana Azam, and then we've got Christine Fletcher, who is a counsellor in Belmont. So we've got those two coming up.
The last 15 months have brought challenges to each and every one of us. But in our communities, there have been shining rays of light, hope for us all. To all of those people across the country who have gone above and beyond to support us all through this incredibly difficult time, thank you. To every key worker, every volunteer, and every person in our lives who has provided support on some of our darkest days, I thank you from the bottom of my heart for everything you do, day in, day out, to make our society a better place. Thank you.
I would like to say a massive big thank you to everyone who helped to keep our communities connected over the past year. Our nurses and health workers in the hospitals and pharmacies and GP surgeries, to the vets, the greengrocers, the bin men, to everyone who helped to keep our communities connected, to the amazing volunteers at the Giles Gate and Belmont Wellbeing Project who kept spirits up with treat and a chat on the doorstep. A big, massive thank you!
So we've heard from both of those, and I think that's a really nice segue into what you've been doing, Angela, and what you know. Rehana Azam was an NHS doctor, and she did work in the pandemic, didn't she? So she has some insight into what it was actually like in the NHS, but most people don't really know. We know it was bad, but we don't really know what went on. So I wondered if you wouldn't mind sharing your experiences of what it was like to be in the NHS.
So where to start, really. So when the pandemic hit, we're very good in the NHS, despite being a big organisation, at flexing and organising, and we did that, and we knew it was coming, and we thought we were going to do this, and we were going to do that, but no one could have prepared us for what came. Just nobody could have. I think the biggest part, personally, affected me through it was the isolation of the patients. So when you're a nurse, it's all about nursing your patient, you're nursing your family of your patient, and all of that, it just got disregarded, really. And we had lots of people who obviously they passed. Fortunately, a lot of them managed to get relatives too, albeit just one, but it was incredibly sad. From an NHS point of view, I think the NHS really did well. I think as an organisation, I think we pulled together and we did everything that we could, and we found new ways of working, and that was really good. So we'll probably carry some of those along as well now. That's good. From medicine and nursing, it was very difficult, and some of the nurses are still suffering now that I work with. I don't think they'll ever get over what they saw, but that's nothing compared to what the families have gone through, to be fair. It was a brilliant team ethos, and it does make you appreciate other people who, we saw lots of posters about nurses, and it wasn't just about the nurses, it was the porters, the pharmacy, the biochemists, it was the woman on switchboard, it was literally everybody as a team worked together so well. So coming out of the other side of it, it feels a bit strange, it feels a bit surreal. And now we're kind of business as usual, which is obviously I work with older people, especially those people with dementia. And you're trying to get back to normality, but on the back burners, you hear, you know, there's a rise in the community of cases, and you're wondering exactly where we're going to head back with this. And lots of nurses have said, I can't do it again. I just can't go through it again. I'm hoping we'll not have to. And I hope that question will never be asked again. But you know, Paul, I think the thing for me is this should have been planned for. And it was planned for. But when we actually went to that box of plans, the box was empty. And I think we can never let that happen again. It's not fair on anybody. And I'm not just on about those people in the NHS who work there. I'm on about the population of this country, you know. It's not fair on them. It can never happen again.
So, like, that's pretty shocking, really, isn't it? Like, when you think about all the things that you've been through. I wonder, Rachel, what do you think about people who've been, you know, through this in the NHS? Someone who hasn't been through it yourself. Is that quite shocking what Angela said there?
Yes and no. No, it's not shocking in the sense that I think if you've been around the past year, you've heard stories I know I didn't go through it personally, but my partner works in the NHS. My closest friend is a nurse in the NHS. I've got a friend who is a doctor, and she's a consultant on a respiratory ward. And so she was right in the middle of it. Her entire ward was COVID this entire time, and she actually had COVID quite badly herself. So it's not shocking in the sense that I've seen and heard stories. And it's shocking in the sense that you're right. It should never have happened. It should never have been this bad. And I think a lot of people, I'm sure yourself included, feel quite let down over this whole pandemic. The way it is, especially the first 6 months, the way it escalated probably could have been prevented had things been in place that should have been. And I think for me, the thing that has impacted me the most in what you've just said is that long-term impact, you know, on the mental health of the people that were involved, on the families, on everyone involved. The rebound is just going to be, it's going to be quite large, I think, and it's going to take a lot of people a while to get back into the swing of their ordinary lives. I think without feeling either constantly paranoid about meeting with people and you know, germ phobias coming to the surface and all sorts of things. But I think the exhaustion and that capacity that we have all been stretched to, it's like an elastic band, isn't it? You get stretched out, but then when it comes back, it's just completely floppy and useless. And it's like that, isn't it? I think we're so stretched that actually we're never going to bounce back to where we were before. And the impact of that is going to be felt for, I think, many years. And that needs to be factored into our everyday interactions with each other, and a little bit of compassion and a bit of understanding, particularly in the workplace. I think with senior members and dealing with people who are struggling with mental health or with exhaustion or anything like that, that needs to be taken into account, doesn't it? Because it's a long-term impact that this is going to have.
Absolutely. I'm going to now bring in a couple of other clips that we've got. This is going to be Samantha Townsend, who speaks about those kind of those people and caring for each other and so on. And then also we've got the legendary Joe Solo to say things in a way that only he can. So we'll bring up those clips now.
Hello, I'm Samantha from Shildon in County Durham. I want to say thank you to everyone who has done just that little bit more during the pandemic. It might be smiling at a neighbour that you've never talked to, even though you've lived in the same street for 10 years. It might be offering to pick up shopping for a friend who's self-isolating, or taking some time at the school gates to console a stressed out parent who is trying to juggle school isolation, their workload and remote learning. Those little moments of social solidarity have really made the last year and a half bearable, so thank you. But when I say that, I don't want us to keep that just a little bit more attitude in the workplace. Many of our key workers were already giving everything they had before the pandemic hit. During the pandemic, we've seen half of our workers working unpaid overtime, and shockingly 65% of nurses working unpaid overtime. We can't allow people's good nature to be exploited in this way. So I'm calling on everyone to pull together and demand that we rebuild from this a better, fairer country, and we reward people with fair pay, conditions and security in work, not just empty gestures.
Hiya, I'm Joe Solo, and if COVID's proved anything, it's proved that every single one of us is worth something in this country, because it wasn't middle managers working from home that kept the wheels of this country turning during COVID. It was the people whose jobs are forgotten about or dismissed. And it's COVID's proven anything, it's that there's no such thing as unskilled labour, just undervalued labour. And it's time we respected everyone. Let's give them a pay rise.
Pretty strong words from Joe there. I don't think there's anything to argue with, really, to be honest. And Samantha as well, like, she made some really, really good points. Have you, either of you, got any thoughts on that? Rachel, I'll come to you first.
Well, I couldn't agree more, really. I think there's a lot of work that has gone on behind the scenes that people haven't really seen. And I know I'm speaking on behalf of teachers, but, you know, the whole clap for the NHS thing, you know, it's great. I absolutely applaud anyone who worked through the pandemic, but I think it's been the way that some staff have been treated, particularly with pay rises and freezes, is appalling. And I think anyone who has worked through the pandemic as a key worker deserves a pay rise completely.
Absolutely. Angela?
Oh, we could have a whole programme on our nurses' pay rises, Paul. We know we could.
Yeah, I think we kind of have in the past, but yeah.
But you know, for me, what kept me going, and this is a bit of a bizarre one, and I think it just echoes what Joe said, was our local convenience store closed at 8 o'clock, and I didn't finish at 8 o'clock during the pandemic. So I used to miss it. So I used to get up and I used to go to Sainsbury's, big Sainsbury's, because it was the only one that was really open. And there was a lady there who worked on the till. And every day I would kind of go in and get my stuff. And one day I'd gone in and I still had my lanyard on because I'd been to a meeting and I hadn't taken it off. And I went in and then she said, "Oh, you're a nurse." And then she had tears in her eyes and she says, "Thank you for everything you've done." And I turned around to her and I said, "You've kept me going these last few weeks." Because every day it was like, "Hi, da-da," you know, it was like chitty chatty, and she was just so nice, and she didn't know I was a nurse or anything at the point that she was being really nice and everything. And I thought, it's people like that, just asking how you are and asking how you get on, you know, working in shops and things, that kept me personally going and kept a lot of my colleagues going as well. You know, it would be it'd be the guy at the petrol station when you went to get your petrol or whatever. And those people kept the key workers going at the front line, but their key workers, I don't know who was keeping them people going, the bus drivers. I know a lot of our staff came in buses, and every morning they would get a smile and just take care. And those were the workers that kept the wheels turning, just like Joe said. So, yeah.
I think, that it's really nice that people sort of started paying attention to those people who'd done such good work over that time when it was obvious. So like NHS and stuff, but we heard like some people who were working in shops got abuse, and maybe that was because people were stressed, but they became on the front line and it became so clear how important they were, but there were a lot of jobs that were forgotten about. Now, Rachel, you mentioned earlier on that you were a supply teacher through that time. And I know as a teacher that, like, you know, we do rely a lot on supply teachers who come in when people are ill and, you know, they keep a good standard of education going for children. And there's a variety of reasons why people become a supply teacher. And, you know, having good, high quality supply teachers there is vital, really, to keep education ticking forward. But you were forgotten about, weren't you? Like the supply teachers throughout all this, there was like furlough arrangements weren't really there for supply teachers. And you tell me about that, because I'm going on a little bit. But you tell me about like what it was like for a supply teacher during the pandemic.
Oh, goodness me. I think it was different for everyone. I think it just depended on, because obviously all work is just on a day-to-day basis, usually in supply, unless you've got somewhere long-term. I think when things first started kicking off, before the schools closed, we were just run ragged. We were everywhere. Obviously, there was a lot of teachers who were absent, who were isolating, things like that. And then it was the supply teachers who would step in the gap there. And with that, you run the risk of, you know, being called into one school and working, and then the next day getting a phone call saying, oh, someone in the school you were just in is actually just been diagnosed, and so you have to isolate now, so you can't work for the next 2 weeks, and you're not getting any money for that. You know, we're not paying you because you're not bringing in any work. So you wouldn't get any money for that. You just wouldn't be able to work. So every single day you were going into a different school, running that risk of, you know, I could come into contact. You know, I don't know these kids. I don't know, you know, any of the staff. All I've got is to come in and do that job. And we didn't have any special PPE. We just had to wear our masks. And at the time, I think protocol was just keep your masks on, except when you're in the classrooms. Once you're in the classrooms, you can take the masks off, you know, just in the corridors and things. And that's all good and well for the bubbles themselves, but and you're moving from class to class, you're not in their bubbles anymore. So it was quite stressful. Obviously, in the beginning, knowing people were dying in a ridiculously rapid. I think the death rate was about 1,000 a day at that point when the schools finally closed. But you just didn't know if it was gonna hit you, you know. And then obviously the schools did close, and if the schools aren't open, you can't get called in for a day's work, and so you didn't get paid. And we did manage to get furloughed the first time around when the government first brought the furloughing out, but it was based on 3 months worth of work, bearing in mind that covered Christmas holidays, of which the schools are closed for 2 weeks, so you don't get any work. And usually after Christmas holidays and summer holidays, the first couple of weeks of the new term, you don't get much work because everyone's fresh. They just had a break. There's not very many absences of teachers. So usually there's not very much work in there. So you're talking about 4 weeks worth of that 3 months not getting any work. And then there was half-term holiday in there as well. So that's 5 weeks out of 12 that you've got no income coming in. So your balance of 3 months work that you got from the agency to work out how much furlough you're entitled to is automatically reduced by almost 50% because of those days that aren't included. So the furlough was a pittance, absolute pittance, and you couldn't just get a day's work here and there because there was none. Schools were closed and there was absolutely no call, even with key workers, children being allowed to go in and vulnerable children, things like that. There was enough of their own staff to cover that. They didn't need supply staff to do that when there was a small amount of numbers of kids going in. And then, of course, when you got to holidays, well, we weren't going to be paying you over holidays anyway, so we're not going to furlough you for that time. So we didn't get furlough for the summer holidays either. So you had hardly any money and no work coming in. And then September came, schools opened again, and we thought, okay, let's get this going. And then obviously things dried up again once the schools were closing, and schools were reluctant to get people in because of cross-contamination. They didn't want very many people in, so there wasn't a whole deal of work for a lot of people. And then the schools closed the second time, and there was no furlough because there was no government support. The agencies weren't willing to pay. A lot of agencies didn't want to pay for that. So there was 0 furlough and I had no money coming in whatsoever. And I'd already had a year of hard and not enough money coming in at all. And I'd used my mortgage holiday. I'd used all the finance holidays I could have. So I had no options. And it was really terrifying, really, really, really stressful. And obviously that's not just me, that's all supply teachers. The financial impact that it will be having on those that are supply teachers is probably the hardest. And I think for me, it's the supply teachers who are new career teachers who have come out of teacher training and there aren't enough jobs and they haven't stepped straight into a job, especially in the pandemic, because there were no jobs for September last year. There were no jobs. Nobody wanted to leave their job in the middle of a pandemic. So there was very, very little shift. So new teachers coming out of university, newly qualified, usually step into supply teaching until something comes up. And they're the ones that I think have probably been the hardest hit because they've got no money coming in after having spent all this time training and with a promise of this amazing career to having absolutely nothing. And hundreds of people fighting for one job, basically. So I think it's been a very highly stressful situation. But those who have been working through the pandemic, those who've had long-term posts in schools, have been absolutely working their socks off. And you don't get, when you're a supply teacher, you don't get the same recognition and thanks in schools as teachers do. You don't get the same respect from students and so many other issues with supply teaching. And I think that they do deserve a big thank you and most definitely more money than they get now. And there's a whole big debate on that one going on at the moment. But yeah, I think supply teachers are valuable. Not just supply teachers, all supply staff are just absolutely invaluable. And the work that they do has kept teaching going, has kept schools open as long as they could, and have helped students to overcome these challenges over the past year as well. Definitely need to thank you.
I think there are a number of things that we could have gone into huge detail over there. Like we've got supply agencies, which are causing all sorts of problems by taking a lot of money, a lot of public money, and offering very little value for that. And also, like, there were things there that I didn't really think of, like new teachers starting their career, and I'm sure they were meant to be on £80,000 a year by now, weren't they? With that, there's that little kid who's the coolest kid in the world drumming. He said, "Oh, and you can be on £80,000 a year next year in the classroom." No, you can't. But that would never happen. But Angela, you'll have been immersed in a world of like dealing with things in the NHS and stuff. So for you, is that an unfamiliar story? Is that something that you hadn't even thought of because you were so busy with your own massive part of this?
Yeah. I mean, I don't understand how as a workforce you can treat teachers the way they treat, because your country will rise or fall depending upon teachers providing a good education for the country's children. Yeah. At the end of the day, if the children aren't getting educated, they're going to look after us in our old age, and that's a worry if we haven't got the education into them. Do you think there would have been some better protection for the supply teachers to keep them in the job, if nothing else? I mean, even if your motive from the government is, pure monetary, it is well within their own interest to keep teachers with a standard of living when they can't work, to keep them in the job. Surely that makes sense. I'm quite shocked at that. I am quite shocked. Well, I'm not actually by this government, but I'm quite shocked as a concept. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a lot of people were put in these awful situations, and you heard about certain things. And I think for me, one of the things that I wanted to do as a national proposer of this day is to make sure that the people who are forgotten about aren't forgotten about. Like who are the people who were important in our jobs? Like no one was at the beginning of the pandemic. No one was saying, "Call a hedge fund manager, quick! There's an emergency." And they came in, the hedge fund managers all came down and said, "Oh, I think you should do that." That's not what happened, was it? It was the people who we needed were people who worked in shops, people who worked in schools, for our vulnerable children, as they were called at the time, where the week before they'd probably been called little Asbos or something like that is by by a lot of people, and then all of a sudden they became vulnerable in the Daily Mail. But you know, and then we had the NHS workers. But you know, as I say, people who collect your bins, what a vital job. If they weren't collecting your bins through that time, and they're going through and they're picking up people's rubbish at higher risk of COVID, probably because like, you know, we didn't know how it was necessarily transferring at the time. People didn't know whether it could be on paper or anything like that. So they're going that extra mile, doing that extra risk, and they're not really getting mentioned anymore. And, you know, supply teachers weren't getting mentioned and teachers weren't getting mentioned. And also I'd like to make a point of saying teaching assistants, learning support assistants and so on. They played a massive role in cleaners as well. Dear me, cleaners. You know, they were the people who, without them, nothing would have ran at all. They needed to clean up after other people and put themselves at risk. And a lot of people are, you know, women of a certain age bracket as well, certainly in my area, who were working in cleaning jobs. A lot of those women were in a vulnerable position themselves, and they kept going. Yeah. So I think now, at this time, I'm going to bring in our next clip, which is from Ian Lavery MP, who is a big friend of the trade union movement and also a big friend of Socialist Think Tank, on which we are broadcasting. And then we're also going to bring in Rehana Azam from the GMB as well. So we'll bring those two in now.
What we've experienced in the last 12 to 14 months, this COVID pandemic, is that it isn't the rich and the powerful that have gotten this country through this very, very difficult period of time. It isn't the hedge fund chief executives, the chief executives of the multinationals and financial institutions, but it's the key workers, the ordinary people of this country that have been absolutely outstanding in the way in which they've met the challenges that we needed to get through the pandemic. The key workers, right from the NHS staff, the local authority staff, the care workers, both paid and non-paid, the supermarket staff, the transport staff, who have been, again, tremendous in ensuring that the country is being able to get where we actually are from where we were. We owe these people a huge debt of gratitude. Of that, there isn't any doubt. A massive thank you. So thank you to all of the key workers, everyone who have put their life on the line to ensure that others might have a decent future. Thank you so much.
From sunrise to sunset and dusk until dawn, every minute of every hour of every day, our workers across the public and private sectors have kept us going through this pandemic, often putting themselves in harm's way. If we spend the rest of our lives thanking them, it won't be enough. As union organisers, we are campaigning for all workers to get a proper pay rise. Join us in our efforts. Thank you.
Now, I suppose both really powerful messages there. Ian's been a big champion of trade unions and key workers. Having been one himself, he would have been classed as that if he had been working down the coal mine back in the day. And Rehana working for the GMB there, working for her members. I think one of the key things to come out of that is, and you alluded to this earlier on, Rachel, like there's clapping, there's saying thank you, there's having a thank you day, which I do agree with, but without saying that this is something like, you know, that we need to deliver for our key workers, a massive pay rise, one that really brings them into line with where they should be, where they would have been before the 2008 pandemic. Now, if you track, like, for example, RPI, I think MPs since the 2008, financial crash, I said pandemic, since the 2008 financial crash, MPs' salary has pretty much tracked with RPI, which is one of the measures of interest. But most workers have had a real terms pay cut since then and continue to do so. And we've had nurses now go to food banks. You know, we can say thank you to these people, but without saying that those people should live a dignified life where they don't have to visit a food bank in order to make ends meet, where they don't have to work 2 jobs, you know, then the thank you is a little bit hollow, isn't it? If we just simply say, you know, oh well, thank you, see you later. I think we've got to say thank you, and we'll fight for you to have a pay rise. I've mentioned nurses again there, Angela. So how do you know we could talk? You said we could talk about this for days. Nurses pay rise. Let's give it a go now.
Right, well, you know my feelings on it, Paul. I mean, I've spoken to it many, many times. I don't know how many times we've had peer reviews and we've been totally done over on them. I mean, for instance, 2010, we're about 20% down in real terms on our earnings. We should have negotiated as the pandemic hit. We were due to go back to the table again for our next negotiation. And obviously we didn't. We got on with what we had to get on with. And there we go. When we say nurses pay rise, it's actually anybody on agenda for change. It's not just nurses. Everybody who works in our NHS. As you know, with Nurses United, quite campaigning for a 15% pay increase. The RCN have come in with 12.5%, and Unison's are lagging behind with a £2,000 pay rise. But something going back to what you were just saying before, just not just about nurses, but I think another important point is about unionisation of workplaces, Paul, because a lot of people who work in workplaces, especially in the hospitality industry, don't have a union. I mean, I can speak to you about nurses' pay rise, but we've got unions who are fighting our case for us. There's lots of people in other industries don't have anybody, and those are the people who've been hardest hit in some respects by this pandemic.
Yeah,
you know, and the teachers have got their unions, and you know, you've got a very good union, fighting your corner, and I do worry about those people. Because they've taken a pay cut as well, but they're not going to be unionised. So I mean, I think this is brilliant. You know, it's about getting our unions to stand up for the workers and things. But if you don't have a union, I think it's more important that a group of people come together in a workplace and get themselves unionised. I really do, because at the end of this, we've made more billionaires from this pandemic. And, you know, if you're on a 0-hour contract working in hospitality, you're a lot worse off. You haven't worked. You're supposed to have been furloughed and then brought back, and then you're starting from scratch again, because obviously it's not the same anymore. You haven't got the table occupancy, and the person that owns your place where you work will be struggling financially. But still, you should be unionised. And I just think if you take nothing away from this big thank you, it's get yourselves unionised.
Yeah.
I think you've alluded to something that I often say there. You were talking about, you know, a group of people in a workplace coming together. Now, I often think the word union is misused by the press, by the government, by whoever, as this like big nasty organisation that's going to come away and take away your freedoms and force all these people to go on strike when they don't want to. And they kind of spin this idea that that's what they want to do. But I often think of a union as people who work in a place. And I think that's very difficult to spin. If you say, you know, if people say, oh, union demands to go on strike, people might think, oh, bloody unions or whatever. And then if you say people who work in a place demand to go on strike, that's humanising. And I think we need to make sure that people realise that trade unions are people who work in a place. That's it. So people who work in a place are upset at the conditions they're working in. and therefore need some support. A lot of nods there, Rachel, so I'm going to bring you in here.
Yeah, I completely agree. I just think I'm an English teacher, so I can't help but reflect on literature. And there is a play that we study for GCSE in Spectacles, and in it there is a young girl who heads up a strike in her factory with all her factory friends that all work together, and she ends up getting fired because the boss doesn't like her. She's causing all this trouble. And I just think it's so important that people who are working they need to come together, exactly as you say. They need to say, look, this is not acceptable. The way that this works is not acceptable. And I'm very much an advocate for people being there was a guy, a leadership guru, I can't remember who it was, who talked about having a mentality of being not being an employee, but being self-employed, even as an employee, because you need to say, this is what I work, and this is how much my work is worth, and so you need to be paying me what I am worth. This is the fee for my service, rather than being dictated to on how much you are worth by someone else. And it changes, shift in mindset is kind of part of that, isn't it? It's saying, look, this is what we're doing, and this is what our services are worth. And actually, you're in debt to us now. You know, if we hired an electrician to come and do some work and we didn't pay them what their fees were, they would say, you owe us this money, and they take us to court. But we are not being paid what we are worth and what we are entitled to. And so that needs to be paid up. Pay up, you know. You're holding back what we are worth. You are holding back our fee for the work we have done, and that needs to stop. And I think coming together with that mentality of saying, look, this is our worth, and this is how much we've worked for. I think coming together and having that strong voice, as you say, Paul, taking away the union it's like a dirty word, isn't it now? It's like the unions cause trouble, but actually when we put it in terms of actually we are together, we are united, and we're saying we are owed this and you need to pay up. It's a lot of a stronger voice, isn't it? And I think we will get stronger the more we stand up together. Definitely. But there are some who are voiceless and who are forgotten, who don't have the words or the I guess the strength always to stand up for themselves. And that's where coming together, you're stronger. And with a union, as you say, if you come together with people who have the vocabulary, who know the policies, who know how to speak to and who to speak to get those things. And that's the important part. It's being able to be together, not just for yourself, but for those who are a little bit more vulnerable and in need of those advocates. So I'm definitely 100%. Everyone should be in a union.
Absolutely. Now I'm going to talk about language again now, just for a second before I introduce the next two clips. And one of the things that really interested me right at the beginning of the pandemic was a word that had been a dirty word. Now that we were mocked for using this on left-wing politics and stuff, and people would talk about solidarity. And solidarity to me is where you're really there for, and the government started using it at the beginning of the pandemic. They were asking people to show one another solidarity. And all of a sudden, it wasn't this like left-wing concept. When they needed it, they wanted people to show one another solidarity and camaraderie. And we'd be laughed at for calling one another comrades, but we needed to show one another camaraderie. And we'd be laughed at for showing solidarity to one another. And yet, when they needed it, they called for solidarity. So I'm going to bring in two clips now of people who show nothing but solidarity to their fellow workers, to their fellow human beings, to their fellow volunteers. This is Nadia Jama, a member of Labour's National Executive Committee, but she's also set up all sorts of different charities and groups. I think Acorn in Sheffield was one of hers as well. And also the Secretary of the Durham Miners Association, Alan Mardghum, who we in the North East really love because he just shows solidarity to absolutely everyone who needs it all the time. So here are those clips now.
I'd like to thank all of the key workers that have kept our families and communities safe throughout this pandemic, and I'd like to send a special thank you to my trade union comrades who have fought for workers' rights throughout this pandemic, fighting against the fire and rehire tactics of unscrupulous bosses. So thank you for everything that you do within our movement too.
The Durham Miners Association are extremely proud to stand shoulder to shoulder with these heroes and heroines of British society. In the face of an inept, incompetent government who wasted billions and billions of pounds on contracts, phony contracts to the cronies for faulty PPE, for inferior goods, £37 billion squandered, friends with benefits getting jobs in high office on the backs of these brilliant workers and the contribution they made. What we are saying quite loud and clear is pay these workers what they deserve. Pay them a decent wage, decent recompense for the jobs that they've done so ably over the last few months. In fact, for years, but more poignantly over the last 15 to 16 months. The DMA stands shoulder to shoulder with you all. We thank you all. Clapham doesn't pay the bills. We say to the government, pay these workers now.
I was going to say couldn't have said it better myself, but I think I couldn't ever have said it as well as that. Well done, Alan. You know, there's no messing about there. And he talked there about crony contracts, and I guess, like, you know, how demoralising was that as a key worker, Rachel? It's like someone who was going in, really worrying about where your money was coming from. Also going in, putting yourself into these dangerous situations, and then you heard about Matt Hancock's mate from the pub making 5 million out of test tubes that he's never made before. You know, how did that make you feel?
I think, in all honesty, I survived the pandemic riding on anger, because there was every day there was something new in the news about something like that coming up, some contract, and I just, you know, when you're on furlough and you haven't got very much to do, you hit Google. And I was researching all the companies, why have they been getting this money? And I couldn't believe it. I was seething. And I think a lot of people were seething. And I'm still seething because it still hasn't been brought to account. And that's infuriating, that they are still patting each other on the back saying, oh, what a fantastic job we did, you know, and I just think, no, you didn't. You have failed the country, and you continue to fail the country. And that money was misspent. That money belonged to the people, and it's robbery. And I am still seething about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Angela, you know, he talked about dodgy PPE really there. Now, this has been almost forgotten about. And Matt Hancock even denied it. And I know now, like, they've decided that him having an affair was worse than all the things that he did and all those lies that he did. But what was it like at the beginning of this pandemic, where you didn't have the right equipment? You didn't have masks that protect you. You kind of had the masks that protected other people from you, wasn't it? Those kind of masks that did more for the other people if you caught COVID than they did for you for not catching COVID. So, you know, what was that like at the beginning?
At the beginning, we saw the pictures from Italy coming over with the nurses in sort of their full gowns and their face masks and, you know, the FFP3 face masks. And we thought, oh, this looks really bad. And then we got Public Health England's declaration that they downgraded the virus. And so, coincidentally, we would not have to wear these. We could get away with a paper mask and a flimsy penny. And we wouldn't catch COVID. Well, evidence to the contrary, because we worked at COVID ward, and everyone in my ward got COVID, apart from one person. And then a lot of them got it again as well. The government supplied our PPE, not the trust. So it was taken out of the trust's hands. So there was trust sort of trying to get proper face masks from different sources. And the government would just come in and say, no, we control the supply chain. And actually, if you go to a company's house, you'll see who's the director of that, one Mr. Hancock. So that really drove me up the pole. But, you know, if anybody follows me on Facebook, they know it did. And I think they must be really sick of me. because I just couldn't believe I was watching all my colleagues go down with COVID. I got COVID twice, and we were still having these ridiculous masks, and it didn't seem like anybody was fighting for us. There was Ian Lavery, he did, Jeremy Corbyn did, but past that, not really anybody bothered. The unions didn't bother either, particularly at that point. And certainly the Labour Party didn't bother. So we were kind of left, we were kind of fed to the wolves on a COVID ward with a paper mask. And it wasn't very good. Addenbrooke's Hospital broke ranks with the rest of the NHS, and they gave their COVID nurses or COVID healthcare workers proper masks. So as we go into the next wave, and we could end. I could end up running another COVID ward. I don't know. We just don't know. Knowing that one of the trusts has broken ranks, obviously, I really expect that we would be provided with proper masks this time at the very least. I don't know how I'm going to feel if we're not. I think we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But they're just. I can't even explain how I feel. I've gone past being angry now. But they just fed us to the wolves. They just let us die on the front line. So what they did was 84,000 of us gone because the government didn't provide us with the correct equipment. 84,000 of us, a lot of people.
Yeah, I think no one will forget the pictures of people in bin bags, like nurses wearing bin bags and care home workers wearing bin bags, and though that kind of lack of care, and there would be so many ways that I think that people came up with at the time, like maybe even all the asbestos companies just saying, well, there you go, there's our masks. You might need these better quality ones, and
Paul, I've seen those supplied. So like I say, it's 840 gone, and nobody to be held account for it. And it's all coming home to roost now, though, obviously, because the research is coming out saying that the paper masks don't really work on a COVID ward. And luckily, our Unison, are actually collating that evidence now, and it is going to be used at some point in time, I would think. And then to see Matt Hancock, I did actually tweet Matt to ask him if he would meet me in a pub, just like he did his landlord who he gave a contract to, because I thought, well, you never know, because I would probably source some better equipment than they have. He didn't reply, funnily enough. And then he got sacked. I can't say I'm sorry he got sacked, but then I was trying to think of one good Tory who I would trust, and I haven't come up with a name yet. So if anybody knows the name of one good Tory in the government who they think could, has the NHS interests at heart, please tell me. I'd love to know.
There's another group of workers that we haven't really mentioned, and in our next clip we're going to have a little mention of them, and that's transport workers. So I think we all remember the bus drivers being spat at, and didn't someone die from catching COVID from being spat at on a bus, and all those people who, again, it's the people who didn't have a choice but to go to work. That's what really defines the key worker for me. Some people had a choice. I was relatively lucky in lots of ways, in that during the height of the pandemic, my working was limited, and a lot of it was from home over Teams or whatever. Some of it wasn't, some of it was. But some people just simply, in order to earn some money, had to go in, put themselves at risk, vulnerable or not. And I'm going to now hear from Sean Hoyle from the RMT, who did, like the RMT, a cracking union, and we have a lot of friends in the RMT who are fighting to make sure that people are safe, because people have a right to go to their work and feel safe and feel Like, they aren't going to be attacked. And, you know, this is another thing that's happened as well. After COVID, they have been attacked quite a lot, transport workers. So we're going to hear from Sean Hoyle. And then we're also going to hear from Laura Smith, the former MP for Crewe, who is also a really big advocate of fighting for key workers and fighting for the NHS.
I want to thank every worker that's helped our society during the pandemic. I want to especially thank all the transport workers. Sometimes they're the forgotten heroes. They're the people that have got all our doctors and nurses to work every day. And as we come out of the pandemic, I want to remind everyone, the real way to say thank you to a worker is to make sure they're looked after properly and to make sure they get a proper pay rise. So thank you to every worker that's actually worked so hard during the pandemic. Please, 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 let's say thank you properly to them and give them a meaningful pay rise.
Wow, so many people to say thank you to, but today I am here in Chester to say thank you specifically to our NHS workers who have been fighting so hard in the most terrible conditions. We need to make sure that we continue to support them in their call for a pay rise, that we are fighting against the privatisation of our NHS. And I really want to say thank you to all those people who, despite how depressing and hard things can seem, continue to fight and to struggle for better for the future. And we need to continue to do that. So don't give up. Thank you for your commitment. I'm going to stick at it. You stick at it too. And don't forget, show support today for the NHS.
So Laura's brought up something that's really important there. Now, through the pandemic, we've kind of learned that people are more important than money. When it came to it, you know, they managed to just invent money. They managed to, it's frustrating when you hear this, there's no magic money tree. Actually, economically, you can just choose to put more money into the economy when you need to. It just depends where that money ends up. And in this case, it's ended up in the hands of billionaires. And, you know, we know we should have this cemented in our brains that it's more important. People are more important than money. People over profit. To those people who need money to exist, then money is incredibly important. But, you know, at the end of the day, you could have invented, like, you could have had a ridiculous amount of money pumped into the economy. If it wasn't for those people who work within it, then, you know, people wouldn't have had their lives saved. And it's all been about people all the way through. Now, she talked there about the privatisation of the NHS. And I think we need to really be aware of this and to make sure that people don't think to themselves, oh, it's all okay now, everything's fine. Actually, we've seen what happened in these COVID contracts. We've seen where the money's been going. And I think we can see that this is going to happen in the NHS as well. Like, if people can make money out of something, they will. And whether that's cutting wages to nurses to make sure that the profits are coming in for the private companies, then so be it. So Rachel, what did you think of Laura's comments there and Sean as well?
Yeah, I think what Laura was saying is you know, making sure that we are continuing to support, and that support is there for everyone constantly. And I think you're totally right, Paul. You know, there is money, and we've clearly seen that there is money. It just is being badly managed. And I don't know who did economics in the government at university, but they clearly don't deserve their degree because they're not managing the country's finances correctly. And, you know, people should be able to manage and live comfortably especially if they work full time. And people are working more than full time and they're still not making ends meet. So I think the fact that we have that money in our country, it needs to go into the right places. Absolutely. I think it's time for change, definitely.
Angela, do you see much evidence of privatisation of the NHS and how would that affect, you know, ordinary workers within the NHS with regards to their well-being and their pay?
So yeah. So it really, I mean, it goes back to John Major, who introduced it. Then unfortunately, it was Tony Blair who kind of started to initiate it, and so it continues at a rapid rate. I honestly believe the only person that can sort the NHS out is a socialist. And the reason I say that is because I firmly believe where it comes to health, education and welfare, there should never be any money involved. I do believe in good financial management. Of course I do. But where those things are concerned, they're the pillars of our society and there should not be any money involved because those are the things we cannot do without. And once you introduce money into a system, you would literally just get a chain of money men follow that money, and that's where it all comes from. We've seen the Americanization of the NHS, and obviously there is a group of GPs now who've just been taken over by an American company. And it's going to just continue on. Now, as far as workers go in the NHS, we've seen people who work for bits of the NHS being tupied over into the private sector with less favourable terms and conditions. And I'm afraid they don't function efficiently because you don't have a retention of staff, you don't have a team ethos, it's driven by money. It doesn't work. It does not work. And those people work alongside me, and we work for the NHS and they don't. And you can see which is fair and better, and which is providing a better service. And I honestly believe the only person that can sort it out is somebody with socialist values, who believes in the pillars of society that should never ever be sacrificed, never be sacrificed to the private sector.
I think it comes back to that people over profit thing, isn't it? It's like, if people don't like the word, and we talked about words earlier on, about whether if people don't like the word, but most people would agree that people are more important than profit. And getting a good service, like getting your relatives or yourself looked after by the NHS, is far more important than someone managing to get enough money so they can stash it in the Caymans. I suppose, the vast majority of people would agree with that. Whether or not they think that is socialism, or whether they think that's just common sense, it's a funny old world when it comes to funny old world when it comes to words. Why did I pick a tongue twister to say? I have no idea. But right, I'm going to move towards the end now because we've got one more message to come, and we're going to finish off on that message. And that message is from Michelle Codrington-Rogers, who's the the past president of the NASUWT, who's got a really powerful message. It's a little bit longer, but it's well worth listening to. We're going to bookend it with education and teaching. I'm going to ask you both for your own final comments on this, and my final comments would be: don't forget about all those people who worked together with you during the pandemic. If you were a key worker, you know that you couldn't have done it without other key workers. In a school, you wouldn't have been able to do it without the cleaners or the caretakers or the teaching assistants or the supply teachers or anyone at all, or the people who would supply in your school with food and all sorts of all the supply chain. We know who the important people were who kept the country running, and it wasn't, as I said earlier on, it wasn't hedge fund managers. And that's who I want to make sure that we don't forget as a national proposer of this day. And we need to think as well, a lot of people have made a lot of money out of this. So it's only fair that the people who actually kept us going through this pandemic are given enough to survive on, enough to live in a dignified way, enough so that they don't have to visit a food bank. I'm going to come to you, Rachel, next. I'm going to finish off on Angela, and then I'm going to go straight into the clip with Michelle. Okay, so Rachel.
Yeah, I think for me, if I could say one last thing, it would be that just be really kind to everyone, because every single person has got a story from this pandemic, and you don't know what's happened to people. You don't know where everyone's at, and you don't know how it's impacted everyone mentally. You can't see that on the surface. You know, if someone's got a nice house and a nice car, it doesn't mean they've been absolutely ruined financially by the pandemic, and their mental health might be completely shot, and they might be really struggling. So just be really kind to everyone, be really understanding, because everyone has worked through this pandemic, whether it is in a job or at home or with their kids or anything. Everyone has had to go through this, and it's that word solidarity. We've all been through this together. So be kind, be as understanding as you can. Even if someone's been an idiot to you, you don't know why, you don't know what they're dealing with. So just be patient, be forgiving, be kind, and we will continue to get through this all together.
Thanks, Rachel, and really appreciate you coming on and giving us your insights. It's been really incredible. So thank you, Angela.
So when you were out on your doorsteps clapping, and you used to speak to your neighbours, and then go and have a chat. You know, go and have a chat with them. Don't forget your neighbours. Don't not talk to them for another 10 years or whatever. You know, some of those things that happened during the pandemic, in some respects, were very positive. The way communities came together. We must keep doing that. We've got to keep doing that. And that would be my final words.
Thank you so much, Angela. And thanks, I'm sure on behalf of our viewers or our listeners, thank you on behalf of them for all that you did personally during the pandemic, and all the people who you worked with did as well. I think a lot of people kind of, when they meet someone who's done it as a nurse, they think they like represent every nurse. So on behalf of us, thank you to you, because you really do deserve a lot of our gratitude. And I'm now going to move to the very last thing, which is going to be Michelle Codrington-Rogers, who is going to give her own personal thank you. She's from the NASUWT. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you share this. We hope you let other people know. And as Rachel said, be kind to one another. And we'll see you again.
My gratitude to the organisers of Thank You Day for this great opportunity. My name is Michelle Codrington-Rogers, and I am a National Officer for NASUWT, the Teachers Union, and a teacher. Wow, what a year. Thank you to our members and colleagues across the UK. Whatever setting you are in, from early years to post-16, from special schools to Ministry of Defence schools, thank you. It is our professionalism and spirit that has been a crucial part of getting us all through the past year. And it's important for us to thank the parents and carers who have shown up for teachers and school staff and shown their support for the work that we do inside and outside of schools and colleges. For our pupils, students, their families and carers, teachers as members of the school community have gone and continue to go above and beyond. Teachers are part of a school workforce that have had to dig deep alongside other key workers to keep the country going. And this wouldn't have been possible without the support of our amazing colleagues throughout the education sector. The TAs, the caretakers, supply colleagues, catering staff, school and community links, just to name a few. And thank you to colleagues who volunteered for school rotas so that those of us who have got care and responsibilities have been able to be there for those who depend on us. Thank you to those teachers who overcame their own fears and worries to continue to put on a brave face so that they are able to support the children, their families and colleagues through this most difficult time. Thank you to those of you who became school reps to make sure that nurseries, schools and colleges were as safe as they could be for all of us, whether we are adults or children in those settings. And thank you to school leaders who have been tested up and down the country, repeatedly facing challenge after challenge after challenge, and putting the well-being and safety of the school community first. Our colleagues have had to reinvent the education system in the blink of an eye, pivoting to ensure that they are able to keep learning happening professionally with integrity, to make sure that our children and young people still face a positive future on the other side of a global pandemic, so that their life choices and life chances continue to be that beacon for their futures. But teachers are also members of the wider community and our society. So I do want to take this opportunity to thank our colleagues who have volunteered for the benefit of the wider community. Those colleagues, those teachers who volunteered for vaccine studies and tracking programs. For those of you who volunteered to look after the vulnerable members of our community through delivering food, collecting prescriptions and doing welfare checks on our neighbours. Thank you to colleagues who were able to offer a smile to our pupils and our children and young people, to our families and our communities. Teachers are more than just teachers, and I am proud to say I am part of a global teaching profession. And I thank you for standing side by side during this most testing of time. And my hope for the future is that we as a society and a community never forget and continue to remember to offer respect, to hold value, and to uphold the wonderful profession that is teaching, that is able to provide an education for our whole community. So thank you for opening this space where I can get to use my most favourite of words. And I will end by saying gracias, merci, and dankeschön to my teaching colleagues and friends across the nation.